The first memory I have was being tied to a bed. He came in and he had a dead cat. And he said, I want you to cut the head off this cat. If you don't cut the head off this cat, I'll cut your head off. And then I cut the cat's head off. And I think that's the first time my brain split.
Expound on what Project BlueBird was a little bit.
It was a government project to change the behaviors, thought processes, ultimately to be able to control a person through programming. It was to break a person's mind, to create splits, multiple personalities that could be controlled. I was abused for about 4 years, from 3.5 to 7. And this is where pedophilia, there are networks. It's the one club that nobody tells on anybody. That's why the Epstein's list ain't out. My stepfather, he put one hand on my wrist, put his finger over my trigger finger, and then he pushed, and I pulled. I shot the guy in his head, and it killed him. There was a government-funded operation called Project BlueBird. It was a different name for the name changed, and it was approaches to help change people's minds, controlling the Manchurian candidate. It was kind of out of that type of, and my stepfather was in counterintelligence in the Army, and we know he was trained in that. I would never say that I was a subject of it by, government funding, but what we do know is what he did to me was textbook of what they would do to people. And
do you want to expound on what Project BlueBird was a little bit?
Yeah, it was a government-funded project to change the behaviors, thought processes, ultimately to be able to control a person through programming. And it required a handler. And ultimately, it was to break a person's mind, to create splits, multiple personalities that could be controlled. So, shit, I can't believe I'm talking about this. So, yeah, the first memory I have was being tied to a bed. I was about 3.5, and by one arm to a bedpost. It was in an apartment, and he came in and he had a dead cat, and he walked up to me and he said, I want you to cut the head off this cat. And I had been tied to the bed all day, on the bed, off the bed. It was one arm, and I'm just like, so he comes in, then, fear turns into terror. And he says, if you don't cut the head off this cat, it was dead. But he goes, I'll cut your head off. So I grabbed the knife, and I remember being terrified. And I think that's the first time my brain split, where it literally, the pressure and the fear of the trauma, your brain splits in order to still function. And me as a child went away, and then I developed this personality that said, yeah, I'll do it. I don't care. And then I cut the cat's head off. And then he placed the carcass of the cat's body, the guts were out, but he placed it on, I remember blood dripping down. There was some type of ritual that he was doing. I mean, it was just the act of it. And there was one other person that came in, and then I just remember him cutting me loose, put me in the shower to rinse off. We later talked to a head voodoo person out of New Orleans, and they explained that in the dark aspect of voodoo, a young virgin boy is the greatest deal to gain power. That's the closest thing I could think of to it. But, and then he did a process over, I was abused by him for about 4 years, from 3.5 to 7. But some of the things he did, I've never talked about it because I didn't, I never wanted anybody to ever do things to another kid. But I've been in this space now, helping kids. And there's just no secrets anymore. It's just bad people do bad things to kids all the time. So yeah, I've been electrocuted. And yeah.
What was how many brothers and sisters did you grow up with?
There were 6 of us in our house. So 4 by one dad, 2 by another dad. So they were half sisters. And it was their dad that, our stepfather that did the abuse.
Did he perform the abuse on everyone?
We know he raped my older sister at, I think she was 11, 12 years old. And because she later spoke of it, one of my brothers, through all of this, he called me one time, and he's passed away since, but he goes, "Victor, I suffered bad things too." And then he hung up. And he wasn't willing to revisit it. So there was abuse. I've never, nobody likes to talk about it to this day. My sister, the one that was raped by him, is the only one that actually came on film to share. And it took a lot of courage for her to do that. So yeah, it was very systematic, where I remember being, he would either use Velcro or saran wrap to hold you in a chair. And he put 2 wires underneath my legs that were connected to a battery. And then it was back when all they had was the film. They would run through a little projector, and he wanted me to watch a film of a young boy being raped in a jungle. And I'm seeing the images, and I would shut my eyes and then he would touch the battery, and it would shock me, which would open my eyes, and I'd see an image and shut it, and he'd do it again. And he did that long enough to where you give up your will, and that's the ultimate. You just give up your will, and you either split, and then after whoever they were, it wasn't him, raped this kid, they cut him up with a machete. And my stepfather just said, "If you ever tell anybody what I've done to you, we'll do that to you." Brought me to a morgue one time. And this is where pedophilia, there are networks. It's the one club that nobody tells on anybody. And that's why the Epstein's list ain't out. Because people don't want, they keep things close. But I remember being at a morgue, again, wrapped to a chair, and watching them dismember a corpse, and then watching them burn it. And he's like, "If you ever tell anybody, it's reinforcing of fear to keep you quiet." And it works, because those are what I call, lies based in reality. And those are the hardest ones to ever get over. When he dunked me in a tub till I passed out, and he would do it multiple times, but I remember passing out, waking up on the bathroom floor to him resuscitating me. And he says, "Boy, don't ever forget, I'm the one that gives you life." And he did. He resuscitated me, or probably would have died. So as a kid, you can't process that outside of, I'm bad, he's good. And it gets all convoluted, but that's the hardest thing for people to work through, or when nobody else knows. So you live in silence, you live in fear, and you still suppress all of that stuff. You compartmentalize it, but it never goes away until it's dealt with.
Where was your mom during all this? Was she aware that this was happening?
So because of my mother's abuse, and my mother's still alive, and I always want to show her honor, I would say that that I can't hold her accountable for what she did or didn't know. And, you know, it's affected all of us. And I just visited with her the other day, and she still laments. She says, you know, I wish I'd have known. And but at one point she did know, and some bad things that were happening. And she told me literally like 2 days ago, she said, you know, I couldn't leave because he threatened to keep the youngest kids, his daughters. And he said, if she said, if I was going to leave, take your kids, but mine stay here. And he said he would abuse them. There's no way she could protect them. So in her flawed thinking, and this was before Child Protective Services, this was, you know, so again, I think she would do it different because we all suffered. And, you know, the hardest part I remember is when my psychologist asked me, when did it stop? And I remember I just freaked out in that session because I thought we were done. You know, I was doing so much better. And she just goes, Victor, when did it stop? And it was after he put me in a vehicle, made me lay in the floorboard, and drove me to an abandoned house. There was electricity to it because there was a light hanging down. And when we walked in, there was another fella in this little wooden house out in the country. And it was actually in Mississippi. And there was a hole cut through the wood floor and then a dirt hole. It was decently deep. And I hear him talking. I was 7 years old. You remember, I got a few years of horrible abuse. And people who don't understand it, you don't run, you don't tell, because there's no way out. You don't have any control of your life, so you just do. And I hear them discussing, and this guy says, I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm looking at the hole, and trust me, enough stuff had happened where I thought, well, this is the day he's just going to kill me and bury me. And I heard my stepfather tell him, oh, it's okay. No, it's okay. You don't have to do anything. And he had a real smooth, relaxing voice. And when the guy kind of relaxed, my stepfather punched him, bam, knocked him unconscious, drug him to the hole in the floor, sat him up on his knees, handcuffed him, and then he pulled out a pistol. It was a revolver. And he said, come here, boy. You're going to shoot this man. And I remember standing behind him, and he placed a pistol in my hand. And he raised it to the back of this guy's head and this high. Now this guy's conscious, and he's begging me, please don't shoot me. Please don't shoot me. Please don't. And I remember I started squeezing the trigger. And I don't know if it was the pounds of pressure, and at 7 I couldn't pull the trigger, or this was just so final in my mind. It was just like, I can't. Whichever one it was, my stepfather, he put one hand on my wrist. He put his finger over my trigger finger. And then he pushed, and I pulled. And I shot the guy in his head, and it killed him. I remember he slumped over, He's bleeding out. You know that gurgle sounds when somebody's dying? And he wiped his hand on the blood on the wood floor, and he slapped it in my face and mouth, like they do when you kill your first deer. And he said, "Boy, that's your first kill of a man." And he shoved him in the hole, and he buried him. And he wrapped the pistol with a handkerchief. And he said, "If you ever tell anybody what I've done," he said, "I know where this body is." And he said, "I'll tell the police it's your fingerprints on this pistol." And he says, "They'll arrest you. They'll put you in prison." And he reminded me of the times he electrocuted me. And he said, "They'll electrocute you to death. So don't ever tell anybody." And that was the last time he abused me.
That was the last time? How old were you?
7.